Grace sighed as she stared out the window of her small apartment, watching the rain trickle down the glass. Another dreary day in the city. At 35, she felt stuck in a rut. Same boring accounting job, same lonely evenings at home. Where was the excitement, the passion she had always dreamed of? Little did Grace know that her life was about to change dramatically. That very evening, as she was walking home from work, umbrella in hand, a gust of wind suddenly whipped it out of her grasp. The umbrella went tumbling down the sidewalk as Grace chased after it, bumping into a tall stranger in her haste. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Grace exclaimed, looking up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The handsome man smiled warmly. "No worries at all. Here, allow me," he said, easily catching up to and retrieving her runaway umbrella. As he handed it back, their fingers brushed, and Grace felt a jolt of electricity. "I'm John," the man said, extending his hand. "Grace?" she replied, shaking it, and hoping he couldn't feel how her palm was suddenly sweating. "Well, Grace, since we've already gotten acquainted, how about I buy you a cup of coffee to warm up? There's a great little cafe just around the corner." Grace hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "That sounds lovely, thank you." As they sat across from each other, sipping lattes and chatting, Grace found herself captivated by John's easy charm and quick wit. He was a freelance writer, he explained, working on his first novel. Grace shared about her accounting work, surprised to find herself opening up to this virtual stranger. Before she knew it, 2 hours had flown by. "Oh my, I should be getting home," Grace said reluctantly. "May I walk you there?" John asked. "I'd love to continue our conversation." Grace's heart fluttered as she agreed. At her door, John gently took her hand. "Grace, I've really enjoyed meeting you. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" "Yes," Grace breathed, hardly believing this was happening. John's face lit up with a dazzling smile. "Wonderful. I'll pick you up at 7. He leaned in and softly kissed her cheek before turning to go, leaving Grace in a daze of happiness. The next evening, John arrived promptly at 7, looking devastatingly handsome in a tailored suit. He presented Grace with a bouquet of tulips, her favorite flower, though she couldn't remember mentioning that. "You look absolutely stunning," John said, his eyes roaming appreciatively over Grace's form-fitting black dress. She blushed, unused to such open admiration. John took her to an intimate French bistro, where they lingered for hours over exquisite food and wine, lost in conversation. Grace found herself sharing hopes and dreams she had never voiced aloud before. John listened intently, his green eyes sparkling with interest. As John walked her home again, Grace's head was spinning. From the wine, yes, but more so from the intoxicating company. At her door, John cupped her face gently in his hands. "Grace," he murmured, "may I kiss you?" She nodded, her breath catching as John's lips met hers. The kiss was soft and sweet at first, then deepened as John pulled her closer. Grace melted into his embrace, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, John rested his forehead against hers. "Good night, beautiful Grace," he whispered, before reluctantly stepping back. Grace floated into her apartment in a haze of bliss. She had never felt this way before, so cherished, so desired. It was like a fairy tale come true. Over the next few weeks, Grace and John were inseparable. He took her on magical dates, moonlit walks in the park, a concert under the stars, even a weekend getaway to a quaint bed and breakfast in the countryside. Grace blossomed under John's affection and encouragement. He praised her intelligence and wit, urging her to pursue her secret dream of starting her own business. With John by her side, Grace felt she could accomplish anything. For his part, John seemed equally smitten. He wrote her poetry, surprised her with thoughtful gifts, and gazed at her adoringly. Grace had never known such devotion. About 2 months into their whirlwind romance, John invited Grace to his apartment for a home-cooked dinner. As she entered, she gasped in delight. The entire place was filled with candles and roses, soft music playing in the background. John led her to the beautifully set table, pouring them each a glass of champagne. "A toast," he said, raising his glass, "to the most captivating, brilliant, beautiful woman I've ever known." Grace, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I love you with all my heart." Tears of joy sprang to Grace's eyes. "Oh, John, I love you too, so very much." John set down his glass and took her hands in his. "Grace, my darling, I know this may seem fast, but when you know, you know. You are everything I've ever dreamed of in a partner. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Grace's heart soared as John got down on one knee, presenting a glittering diamond ring. "Yes!" she cried. 1,000 times yes! They celebrated their engagement with passionate lovemaking, falling asleep in each other's arms. Grace had never been so blissfully happy. The next morning, Grace woke to find the bed empty beside her. Stretching languidly, she called out, "John?" There was no response. Wrapping herself in a robe, Grace padded out to the kitchen, expecting to find John making breakfast. But the apartment was silent and still. A folded note on the counter caught her eye. Smiling, assuming it was a love note, Grace opened it eagerly. Her smile faded as she read the words within. "Dearest Grace, I'm so very sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. The truth is, I'm not who you think I am. Everything I told you about myself was a lie. I'm a con man, Grace. I make my living by seducing lonely women, gaining their trust, and then robbing them blind. You were to be my latest mark. But something unexpected happened. I fell in love with you. Truly, deeply in love for the first time in my life. I can't go through with my original plan. I'm leaving now and you'll never see me again. Please forgive me for the pain I've caused you. Know that my love for you was real, even if nothing else was. Goodbye, my darling. Jay." Grace sank to the floor, her world shattering around her. How could this be happening? How could the man she loved, the man she had agreed to marry, be nothing but a lie? Somehow, Grace managed to gather her things and stumble home in a daze of shock and grief. She called in sick to work and spent the next week in bed, alternating between sobbing and staring numbly at the wall. How could she have been so blind, so naive? Grace berated herself for falling for John's act. She had always prided herself on being level-headed and practical. How had she let herself be so thoroughly fooled? As the initial shock wore off, Grace's sadness turned to anger. Not just at John for his deception, but at herself for being such an easy target. Never again, she vowed. She would never let herself be so vulnerable again. Slowly, Grace began to pick up the pieces of her life. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra projects to keep busy. She started going to the gym regularly, working out her frustrations on the treadmill and weight machines. Months passed. Grace went through the motions of living, but inside she felt hollow. The spark of joy and hope that John had ignited was extinguished, leaving only cold ashes behind. Then one day, nearly a year after John's disappearance, Grace's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Warily, she answered. "Hello, is this Grace Thompson?" A man's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling, please?" "Miss Thompson, this is Detective Mark Rodriguez with the NYPD. I'm calling about a man named John Doe. I believe you knew him as John Anderson?" Grace's breath caught. Yes, I knew him. What about him?" "Miss Thompson, we've apprehended Mr. Doe. He's wanted in multiple states for fraud and theft. We found your information in his belongings. Would you be willing to come down to the station to answer some questions?" Grace's mind reeled. They had caught John? After all this time? "Of course," she heard herself saying. "I'll be right there." At the police station, Detective Rodriguez ushered Grace into an interview room. He explained that John had been arrested trying to pull the same con on another woman. They had found Grace's engagement ring among his possessions. "Miss Thompson, I know this may be difficult, but we need you to tell us everything you can about your relationship with John Doe. Any details you can provide will help build our case against him." Taking a deep breath, Grace recounted the whole sordid tale. With each word, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. It was cathartic to finally speak about what had happened. When she finished, Detective Rodriguez thanked her for her cooperation. "There's one more thing," he added. "Mr. Doe has requested to speak with you. You're under no obligation to do so, of course. It's entirely up to you." Grace's first instinct was to refuse. Why should she give that liar the time of day? But curiosity got the better of her. Maybe confronting John would provide some closure. "All right," she said. "I'll speak to him." The detective led her to another room with a two-way mirror. On the other side sat John, handcuffed to the table. Grace's breath caught at the sight of him. He looked older, haggard, but those green eyes were the same. Taking a steadying breath, Grace entered the room. John's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "Grace," he breathed. "You came." "I'm here," she said coolly, taking a seat across from him. "What do you want, John? Or whatever your real name is." "It is John," he said quietly. "John Matthews?" That much was true. Grace arched an eyebrow skeptically. "And I'm supposed to believe anything you say because—" John winced. "I deserve that. I deserve all your anger and mistrust. But Grace, I need you to know, everything I said in that letter was true. I did fall in love with you. I do love you, more than I've ever loved anyone." Grace scoffed. "Right. You loved me so much you lied about everything and then abandoned me without a word. Forgive me if I'm not convinced." "I know," John said, hanging his head. "I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you by leaving, but really I was protecting myself. I couldn't bear to see the look in your eyes when you learned the truth about me." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I've regretted it every day since. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I tried to go straight, to become the man you deserved, but my past caught up with me." Despite herself, Grace felt a flicker of her old feelings stirring. John did seem genuinely remorseful, but she quashed that spark ruthlessly. She wouldn't be fooled again. "Why did you want to see me?" she asked. "To ease your conscience?" John shook his head. "No, well, partly, but mostly, I needed to see you one last time, to apologize face to face for all the pain I caused you, and to tell you that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. You made me want to be a better man." Unbidden tears sprang to Grace's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "I'm going away for a long time," John continued, "but I want you to know that I'll spend every day trying to become someone worthy of your love. I know I've lost any chance with you, but maybe someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Grace stood abruptly. This was too much. "I have to go," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Wait!" John called as she reached for the door. "The ring. My lawyers will be in touch about returning it to you. It's yours." Grace paused, her hand on the doorknob. Without turning, she said, "Keep it, sell it. Use the money to pay your legal fees or something." Then she was gone, hurrying out of the station and onto the busy street. She gulped in the fresh air, trying to calm her racing heart. That night, Grace tossed and turned, unable to sleep. John's words kept echoing in her mind. Despite her best efforts, she found herself wondering, had there been real love there, underneath all the lies? Over the next few weeks, Grace struggled to process her conflicting emotions. She was still angry at John's deception, still hurt by his abandonment, but she couldn't deny that a part of her still cared for him. Grace threw herself into starting the business she had always dreamed of, her own accounting firm catering to small businesses and startups. As she worked long hours getting things off the ground, she had less time to dwell on John. Months passed. Grace's business began to flourish. She started dating again casually, but found it hard to open up. The wound John had left was slow to heal. Then one day, about a year after their confrontation at the police station, Grace received a letter. Her heart jumped when she saw the return address. It was from the prison where John was incarcerated. With trembling hands, Grace opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Grace, I hope this letter finds you well. I've thought of you every day since I last saw you. I want you to know that I meant what I said that day. I am working hard to become a better man, someone deserving of your love and trust. I've been taking classes here in prison, getting my GED, learning computer skills. I've even started writing that novel I always talked about. It's about a man who loses everything because of his own mistakes and his journey to redemption. Sound familiar? I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you're willing, I'd love to hear how you're doing. Detective Rodriguez mentioned you were starting your own business. I hope that's going well. I always knew you could do anything you set your mind to. You don't have to write back if you don't want to. I'll understand. But know that you are always in my thoughts and in my heart. All my love, John." Grace set the letter down, her mind whirling. She was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. For days, she agonized over whether to respond. Part of her wanted to ignore the letter entirely, but another part, a part she thought long buried, yearned to reconnect with the man she had loved so deeply. Finally, Grace sat down at her desk and began to write. Dear John, thank you for your letter. I'm glad to hear you're making positive changes in your life. You're right, I did start my own business. It's going well. Challenging, but rewarding. I think you'd be proud of me. I won't lie, what you did hurt me deeply. It's taken a long time for me to heal, but I've realized that the time we had together wasn't all bad. You helped me find the confidence to pursue my dreams. For that, I'm grateful. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm open to continuing this correspondence if you'd like. Take care, Grace. As she sealed the envelope, Grace felt a glimmer of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. She didn't know where this path might lead, but for the first time in years, she was excited to find out. Over the next few months, Grace and John exchanged letters regularly. John shared about his progress in prison, the classes he was taking, the therapy sessions helping him understand his past behavior. Grace told him about her growing business, her newfound confidence, her gradual journey of healing. Slowly, cautiously, they began to rebuild a connection. It wasn't the whirlwind passion of before, but something deeper, more grounded in honesty and mutual growth. 2 years into John's sentence, he became eligible for early release based on good behavior. In his letter informing Grace of this, he wrote, I'll understand if you don't want to see me, but if you're willing, I'd love to meet with you when I get out, to apologize in person again, and to show you the man I've become, a man who will spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of your trust. Grace's hand shook as she read John's words. Her heart raced as conflicting emotions washed over her. Anger, hurt, longing, hope. After several long moments, Grace set the letter down and took a deep breath. She knew she had an important decision to make. Could she open her heart to John again after everything that had happened? Or was it better to leave the past in the past? Grace spent the next few days in deep contemplation. She thought back to the whirlwind romance she had shared with John, remembering both the joy and the pain. She reflected on how much they had both changed and grown in the years since. Finally, Grace sat down at her desk and began to write. Dear John, thank you for your letter. I'm glad to hear you're doing well and making positive changes in your life. I won't lie, what you did hurt me deeply. It's taken a long time for me to heal and move forward, but I've realized that our time together wasn't all bad. You helped me find the confidence to pursue my dreams. For that, I'm grateful. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm open to continuing this correspondence if you'd like. Perhaps we can get to know each other again, slowly, as the people we are now. Take care, Grace. As she sealed the envelope, Grace felt a glimmer of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. She didn't know where this path might lead, but for the first time in years, she was excited to find out. Over the next few months, Grace and John exchanged letters regularly. John shared about his progress in prison, the classes he was taking, the therapy helping him understand his past behavior. Grace told him about her thriving business, her newfound confidence, her gradual journey of healing. Slowly, cautiously, they began to rebuild a connection. It wasn't the whirlwind passion of before, but something deeper, more grounded in honesty and mutual growth. 2 years into John's sentence, he became eligible for early release based on good behavior. In his letter informing Grace of this, he wrote, I'll understand if you don't want to see me, but if you're willing, I'd love to meet with you when I get out, to apologize in person again, and to show you the man I've become, a man who will spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of your trust. Grace's hands trembled as she read those words. She knew this was a pivotal moment, one that could change the course of both their lives. After days of internal debate, Grace made her decision. She wrote back to John, I think I'm ready to see you. Let's meet for coffee when you're released. We can take things one step at a time from there. The day of John's release arrived. Grace's stomach was in knots as she waited at the small cafe where they had agreed to meet. When John walked in, her breath caught. He looked older, more weathered, but those green eyes were the same. "Grace," John said softly as he approached. "Thank you for coming." "John," Grace replied, her voice wavering slightly. "It's good to see you." They sat down, an awkward silence falling between them. Finally, John spoke. "Grace, I know I can never fully make up for what I did to you, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am and how much I've changed. These past years have given me a lot of time to reflect and grow. I'm not that man anymore." Grace nodded, studying John's face. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the remorse etched in the lines of his face. "I believe you, John," she said, "but trust takes time to rebuild. If we're going to try to have any kind of relationship, even just a friendship, we need to take things very slowly." "Of course," John agreed quickly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Grace. I just want the chance to prove myself to you." They spent the next hour catching up, sharing stories of the years that had passed. As they talked, Grace felt some of her tension easing. This wasn't the charming con man who had swept her off her feet. This was a man who had faced his demons and was genuinely trying to be better. When it was time to leave, John hesitated. "Grace, would it be all right if I called you sometime, just to talk?" Grace considered for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I think I'd like that, but let's stick to phone calls for now, okay?" John's face lit up with a smile. Not the dazzling grin of before, but something softer, more genuine. "Thank you, Grace. I promise I won't let you down again." As Grace walked home, she felt a warmth in her chest that had been absent for years. She didn't know what the future held for her and John, but for the first time in a long time, she was open to the possibilities. Over the next few months, John and Grace spoke on the phone regularly. Their conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes deep and meaningful. Slowly, the walls Grace had built around her heart began to lower. 6 months after their first meeting, Grace agreed to have dinner with John. As they sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant, John reached out and gently took her hand. "Grace," he said softly, "I know we still have a long way to go, but I want you to know, I love you. I always have, even when I didn't deserve to. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she squeezed John's hand. "I love you too, John," she whispered. "I think I always have, but this time, let's build something real, something that will last." John nodded, his own eyes glistening. "That's all I want, Grace. A chance to love you the way you deserve, honestly, faithfully, for the rest of our lives." As they leaned in for a soft kiss, Grace felt her heart truly open for the first time in years. She didn't know what challenges they might face, but she knew that this time, their love was built on a foundation of truth, growth, and mutual understanding. This time, it was real. And so Grace and John began their new chapter together, not as a fairy tale romance, but as two flawed, complex people committed to loving each other authentically. It wouldn't always be easy, but they both knew it would be worth it. For in each other, they had found not just love, but redemption, healing, and hope for the future.